So, here we are in the Middle Ages. I mean, nothing says Middle Ages like a street lamp, huh? There we go. All right, so here's the thing about the Middle Ages. Kind of different from us in so many ways. Now, when I say the Middle Ages, of course, I'm referring to not just one period of values and practices and beliefs that went on for 1,000 years. If you read the intro to the Middle Ages, I think my book seems to be disappearing, but there it is. Okay. You read that, the editors of your text make very clear that there were actually lots and lots of things going on. And that the Middle Ages is not just a single coherent time, but actually a very chaotic time. It was called, of course, the Middle Ages only after the Middle Ages was done, right? But roughly speaking, we talk about the Middle Ages as beginning with the fall of Rome, which is late in the 5th century CE, right? In other words, after the Roman Empire basically is done. And it lasts more or less 1,000 years. And in English lit, I should say, right, with its focus on England, we roughly basically say, okay, with the beginning of the Tudor dynasty in 1485, right? So you have from like 476 to 1485. So for all intents and purposes, a full 1,000 years. It's hard to really overstate the differences, right? There's, how should I put this? I mean, there's just so many. First of all, let's begin with religion. Religion is the center and focus of life. It is run, by and large, in Western Europe through the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, now there are many different squabbles within the church over that time. There are many squabbles all over the place, quite frankly, during that time. But it is nevertheless somewhat of a unifying factor. Okay, is that church. And even more importantly, we could probably say just centers of faith and belief, right? As opposed to later with the Renaissance and the Reformation, how other things like science, for instance, become more and more prominent. Okay. With the fall of Rome, you get a lot of struggling for power, right? Instead of a single base of power coming out of Rome, all around Europe, including England, right? You have lots of struggle, lots of conflict. In England, right? A key point is in the year 1066, right? When William the Conqueror, invades. He's a Norman. Invades from France and defeats Harold Godwinson and basically starts the reign of monarchy that we still have, or not we, but the UK still has with it today in Queen Elizabeth the Second, who has been on the throne for about 3,000 years. The issue of science, right, is very secondary, right? Learning is very, very restricted. The ability to read is very, very restricted. There's a very strong sense of kind of a tribalism, right? Us versus them, right? Based on ethnicity or family. Now, when we get introduced to the three major pieces that we're going to look at in this section, right? We're going to look at Beowulf, which is written initially in Old English and therefore has to be translated because Old English is not easy. I personally have never studied Old English myself. Then we have Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales, amongst other pieces, and we will read Chaucer in his original language, which is Middle English, Okay, not Old English, but Middle English. Middle English is close enough to modern or contemporary English that we can, even without a whole lot of training, right? Basically amateurs can read and understand a great deal of Chaucer if they're willing to sit down and put the time in. Now, I know there's a very natural desire to want to read Chaucer in translation into contemporary English, and you certainly can do that if it becomes very difficult. But I would like you to give it a try, give it a whack. It's actually not that hard. Okay, it's really not that hard. And then you can have a lot of fun, go online to YouTube or other places and listen to people who actually know what they're doing to speak the original language of Chaucer. Maybe I'll find a good YouTube video of somebody doing that and post it up. We'll see what happens with that. It's actually harder to hear it and understand it than it is to read it and understand it. With the help of our editor's footnotes and other glossary helps, as I said, it's actually a fun read, and it's not nearly as hard as you might think when you first begin. So we're going to be looking at the Canterbury Tales, basically 3 parts to it. The general prologue, which is the introduction to all the different travelers in the Canterbury Tales, right? They're all traveling to Canterbury, which in those days was quite a deal. And then we're going to look more carefully at 2 particular tales, the Miller's Tale, a bawdy tale, and the Wife of Bath's Tale, which is, in my opinion, incredibly interesting, but not for the tale so much as it is for her introduction, which is actually much, much longer than her tale. In the Canterbury Tales, the introductions to the characters are mostly very brief, and then the character tells their tale. In the case of the Wife of Bath, it's the opposite. Most of the time is spent talking about the Wife of Bath herself as a very interesting person. And then her tale it's not nearly so long as the introduction. The third and final work that we're going to look at is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And I'm sorry if I mispronounce Gawain, I can never quite figure it out myself. That is also a contemporary to Chaucer, but it is in a dialect that is harder to read, and therefore we have a modern or contemporary translation of Gawain and the Green Knight. Do not, please watch the movie. The recent movie that was done was so horrible, and it has nothing to do with the actual tale. I mean, except for the title and some characters. It completely changed everything. If you write on this, either in discussion threads or in your essay, and you've only seen the movie, you're not going to pass because it's not at all the same tale. It's not at all the same. Okay, because you won't have any idea what was really going on. So that's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen. So for the first month, basically, of this semester, we're going to be looking at those 3 major works. Okay, Beowulf, Canterbury Tales, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So let me address a few things up front very, very simply. Besides even what I said about Middle English being hard to read, it's often very hard for us to relate to the values that motivate the characters. I mean, in some ways we do, right? There are some characters and some situations where we say, oh, that's romantic love, right? Isn't that always the same, right? But there are other issues that are very important, okay? And when we talk about each of the works, I will make a video that introduces each of these works. And so we can address that more succinctly and more to the point. But you've got to remember this is a time period so different from ours. The world is a bigger place, right? We don't have airplanes. We don't have cars. We don't have mopeds, right? Everywhere people went, they either walked rode a horse, took a boat. And those boats weren't exactly like cruise ships. Okay. When night fell, it was friggin' dark. Okay? They didn't have these street lamps like you see over here. That's later, right? Right. You had to light a fire if you wanted to see anything at night. People did not live as long. Of course, people died young. I mean, a lot of babies died, a lot of children died, a lot of women died in childbirth, giving childbirth, I should say, having children. War was common, violence was common. People were short too, by the way, really, very short. If you go and you see these castles and you see the size of doorways and stuff like that, it really kind of makes you realize things were different. Okay. People were superstitious, and I don't even mean in the religious sense. I mean even beyond that. I mean with a sense of magic, not exactly a David Blaine kind of magic, right? But right, that things were possible in this world that were completely unexplainable, and they were accepted because of that. As I said, it was much more of a tribal society, right? You don't have quite yet the big building of nation states that we're going to see later in the semester. So for instance, in Beowulf, right, there are different essentially tribes of people, right? And who you are is important in the sense of who you are is defined by the tribe that you belong to, the family that you belong to, okay? And multiculturalism is not exactly a hallmark of this time period. Tolerance is not a hallmark of this time period. And for women, their roles are incredibly curtailed. But in all fairness, for most people in terms of the population, right? Most people were peasants, and they didn't live too long anyway. But they're replaceable. A very small number of people had power and education. You had a very pyramid-style society, right, with the king at the top, a single person. And I do say king because it takes a while before we have queens, right, who are leaders. We'll talk about that when we get into the Elizabethan era. By the way, Elizabeth was not the first queen to be the sovereign of England. That would be her half-sister, Queen Mary. But you have a king, you have aristocrats, nobility, you have the church and the structure of the church, and it's almost kind of parallel political, also hierarchy, right, with the Pope in Rome and bishops and so on and so forth. So the overwhelming mass of people are kind of quiet and unknown to us. They were illiterate. Whatever is passed down from them had to be written down by others, right? So what we know about the majority of people is actually very limited. Okay, so it's very frustrating in that sense, right? But still, we can take a peek at what mattered, what was valued, and of course, as I mentioned, this is a long period of time. Beowulf is written hundreds of years before Chaucer lived, right? And Chaucer's time is closer to the end of the Middle Ages. It's still Middle Age, but it's still different, but it's not the same as Beowulf, right? And same thing with Gawain, which is, as I said, contemporaneous to Chaucer. So we'll take a look at all these things. Hopefully learn a great deal. Please begin by reading that introduction, though, in the Norton Anthology, because most of us haven't really studied the Middle Ages. Very few people really study it formally before they get into college, at least. So we're not well acquainted. So let's do the best that we can.